In today's episode, we dig deeper into an excerpt from Marcus Aurelius Meditations, book 10.3. It's not a long extract, just a handful of sentences in total, but for me, it clearly represents Aurelius seeking to pull together many of the Stoic teachings into one summary, in order to fasten himself against the deluge of hardships he faced and tried to lead his empire through. The quote goes as such: "Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it's endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. If it's unendurable, then stop complaining. Your destruction will mean its end as well. Just remember, you can endure anything your mind can make endurable by treating it as in your interest to do so, in your interest or in your nature." End quote. In these sentences, Aurelius seeks to identify the importance of being able to discriminate between what is and is not in his control. He also uses this statement to remind himself that he has within the inner resources to overcome whatever trials he currently faces. He uses logic by stating that, to him, there are only two options. The first is that something can be endured, in which case he and humans in general have the capacity to endure it, and should therefore do so. Or the second option, that it is not something which can be endured, which in the eyes of Aurelius leads us to speculate that ultimately it's something you may lose your life to. And in this scenario, he envisages that with your passing comes the end of the object which was to be endured in the first place also. This could be an extreme way of thinking for some, but if we must consider this, we must remember the time when Aurelius wrote it. It was the time when the Antonine Plague devastated the citizens of the Roman Empire, when healthcare was in its infancy, when humans were still being subjugated to slavery, and when the overall living standards for the vast majority of the population were unimaginably lower than in our modern lives. The second thought is of death itself as an ultimate end. When we look at it in percentages, we can understand that the odds of something not happening or not leading to death are extremely high. Therefore, there is a huge proportion of things which can ultimately be endured, far greater than the odds of us encountering something which cannot. However, instead choosing to use the word destruction. So, are we to interpret the word destruction to be more of a broad statement in which one could suffer a loss of character, or integrity, or virtue, even of sanity? Who knows? Finally, and somewhat bluntly, he reminds himself that in both circumstances that to complain is impotent. Aurelius knows it's wasted energy, emotions spent that bear no fruit. And it's a point he makes to himself countless times throughout Meditations, most prominently in book 8.9, in which he states, "Do not be overheard complaining, not even to yourself." To some, excerpt 10.3 could be criticized as being a bit too broad of strokes, that life doesn't always work in absolutes and there's invariably a grey area. You could ask, where is the humanity? Where is the space for human suffering? Where is the empathy? But to ask those questions, you could argue, is to miss the point of what he is trying to remind himself in his words. And at the time of writing, his words were intended only for him. He had his imperfections, and he certainly made mistakes, but Aurelius had time and time again committed actions which represented just how capable and empathetic a leader he was. It's why in hindsight he's often favourably known as the philosopher king. What we can take from this passage are the direct words from one man, one person to themselves to find inner strength to do what he felt was needed. He reminded himself not to complain and to seek to do no harm to others. In modern terms, it's like looking yourself in the mirror and saying to yourself, "You've got this." It's that moment of self-belief that can cut through barriers and says no in defiance of the obstacles and challenges that we all inevitably face. It's what we all need when times get tough, to just remind yourself to keep your head down and keep on going. Finally, he talks about the necessity of mental fortitude and one's ability to make a purposeful and cognizant choice. He states that it is within our power to decide that to endure something is in our best interests, to make that choice for the greater good, and the alternative, in Aurelius's eyes, would ultimately mean death. Except he doesn't explicitly state death in this excerpt. So, from the philosopher king 2,000 years ago to you and I, the modern day person living here in 2021, over a year past the start of a global pandemic no less, Marcus Aurelius would say, if it's endurable, then endure it. And you can endure this. It is within you. This is endurable. And you can say to yourself today, you've got this.